So one key question becomes, how do we help people identify their specialization? Because this is a question that is not that simple. It is really an important question. So part of it is shifting people from there, because I'm sure you've all seen resumes that describe the responsibilities, and shifting people from responsibilities to results. So going from, well, here's what I did, to here's what I accomplished. So I worked in an outplacement organization for a little while, and the tool they were using was this one. Now, there's many different versions of the tool, okay, like STAR, CAR, SOAR, I mean, like whatever. My experience, what matters is not the tool itself. What matters is, does the person use it? And what I mean by using it is this. So in your handout, you will see, so let me grab that. You will see 2 resumes and a table. The table is the part that is the key part right now. This table here. So I used some, like the example of somebody I worked with. So this guy is Evgeny. He's from Belarus. And you can see also his resume. Well, you can see 2 versions of his resume, before and after, in essence. So how we got from before to after, and I'm sure you can tell which one's which, is through this tool. And I asked him, and this is the advice I give everybody, describe every project you've worked on in this format. Now, whether you use this format or a slightly different format doesn't matter. The part that is critical is describe every project you worked on. Why is this so important? In most cases, what I've seen happen is if you ask the person what problem are you good at solving, they don't know how to answer. If you ask them what's your specialization, they don't really know how to answer. But if they go through this exercise, quite often what happens is a pattern starts to emerge. You will see that the person has applied the same kind of skill in different contexts. So identifying what that skill is becomes, to me, one critical element of the job of a counselor. Because people are a bit lost when it comes to that. But if you can help them, it can make a world of difference. So if you look at Evgeny's resume before, it's very obvious. It's a generalist resume. You know, I want to obtain a mechanical designer position. And then he lists a lot of things under the sun. And this is the challenge. Like, it is not focused. So if you take Evgeny's accomplishment tables, look at it. See if you can identify the pattern.
Again, sorry?
The question is, what is the pattern in his experience? What do you see?
I see some
Design.
Yeah, so design is part of the pattern. Cost reduction, exactly. He's really good at making things cheaper. Okay. And if you read a bit closer, I mean, you won't have time, better. Better. Now, what kind of things was he making better? That part you would have to take a bit more time to see the pattern. But if you read it carefully, you will see that all the things that he was improving were the same kinds of things. You know, when you have a cell phone tower, has to be outside, so it can receive signal and send signal. You have in those cell phone towers electronic systems. And those systems need to be protected by a box, because otherwise they'll fry in the winter or heat up or whatever, it will go wrong. So you need to create some form of enclosure, something that will protect it from the weather. That enclosure has to be able to get the heat out in the summer, has to keep the thing, protected from humidity, from snow. It also has to be able to, you need to be able to open it so that you can change something if something goes wrong, like a fuse blows up or something like that. And you need to be able to make it relatively cheap, because that's not the important part. So what he was designing was these enclosures. So if you look at the after resume, everybody sees that one? Look at the first line.
Specializing the design of enclosures for
That's it. And this is the point. Now, guess what kind of job he's going to get with that resume? He's going to design enclosures for electronic systems. Yeah? Actually, the job he got, you know, on the, what is it called? The stone, what is it? The ring road around.
Stony Trail.
Yeah, Stony Trail. On Stony Trail, you have signs that say traffic jam ahead, all that kind of stuff. He designed the boxes for those signs.
Oh.
Yeah. So the job he got was designing boxes for systems that need to be outside. And he was very good at that. It is very clear. If you look at his after resume, you will see particularly the job in Belarus. It's like, he's got a whole page of projects where he saved money and made things better. So clearly, that is, again, somebody who has a specialization, a skill that he's really good at. And so this tool I have found is one of the fastest ways as a counselor to be able to identify what is the pattern. Because most people, if you ask them, don't know. I'll give you another example of somebody I worked with. So this guy, he was a mechanical engineer from India. And when I met him, I told him, like he said, well, what do you do? Well, he said, I'm a mechanical engineer. I have 12 years of experience in the paper product, tobacco, and automotive industry. So in other words, he has 12 years of experience, but spread over 3 different unrelated industries. So many Canadian engineers, when they hear that, will essentially do something like this mentally. You have 12 years of experience. So I'm going to give you credit of 4 years in each area. Kind of just as a rule of thumb. And then people will ask the person, in which industry did you work last? And if you worked last in paper product, and I'm in automotive industry, what happens? It means your automotive industry experience is more than 4 years ago. In other words, as you were saying, obsolete. Because as you were saying earlier this morning, experience, in my experience, experience has a 5-year shelf life. Yeah. Same thing with degrees. Canada is a short-term oriented society. I find most Canadians will live in a time zone 5 years in the past, 3 years into the future. Whatever happened before 5 years in the past, gone. It's the Roman Empire. Whatever happens in more than 3 years into the future, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That's the phrase I've heard so many times. Yeah? So it's -5 + 3. Anything that happened outside of that window, gone. Doesn't matter. So in the case of this guy, the key expertise was improving processes. And he had a 6 Sigma black belt. So that is a very valued designation, particularly in the automotive industry. But the thing is, again, he was describing his experience as broad, as opposed to specialized. When he changed his resume, he was somebody who, like, he got the concept, like, and then he ran with it. And he got himself a job in an engineering consulting firm, improving processes for their clients. So this is why I'm saying, like, trying to understand the specialization, and usually you get it by having people say what they've done in every single project. And I've used that tool also with, like, students in engineering schools, for example, because they will all say, well, we don't have a specialization, we're just studying. It's like, yeah, but you are not doing everything. What have you done within your studies? And the other thing is, in your extracurricular activities, what have you done as well? Because usually if you have a strong suit, it will also show up in your extracurricular activities. Make sense to everybody? So the challenge is this. It takes time. Tamasp with his 25 years of experience. Like when he created that table, it took him several weeks. But that time will make a world of difference. Because then, because you will be able to use that material in so many ways. One is identifying the area of expertise of the person. Two will be you have the raw material for the resume. Three, you have the raw material for the interview preparation. You have the material for networking. So this table I find is a critical element as a counselor to help the person reach their goal. Questions or comments? Make sense to everybody? All right. So, how you convince people to do it, that's not always easy. I mean, I know what I mean is, like, people will look at that and it's like, well, this is not, how is that going to help me get a job? Well, you're not sending a resume, that's true. So in itself, it won't give you a job right away. But if you're able to think long term, it will make a world of difference. I mean, it's really striking. Yes, hang on, let me give you the this thing.
What happened when the people want to have a career change?
Ah.
I hope that I didn't turn it off.
Oh, okay.
With my question.
So what happens when people want to do a career change? So I really do not recommend to immigrants when they look for a job and they just arrived to change career. Yes. Because it's so difficult. And in Canada, my experience is you can only change one variable at a time. Yeah. So if you've changed country, that's it. Like, you cannot change anything else. No. So now, some people will have to because there is there's no way they can work in whatever they were doing back home. Okay, it doesn't exist here, for example. Sorry. And some people will down the road want to change career. What I find is the most effective way to change career in Canada is to do it gradually. So what I mean by that is, so let me try to draw that. The engineer comes out again. Many people think of, so if this is time, and this is the percentage of your work that you do in each area. So this is 100% and this is 0. Many people will conceptually think of their career change as, I was doing engineering and I'm going to go into HR. Okay, and so HR, for them, HR is going to go the other way around, meaning it's 0, and then suddenly like that. I really want to encourage people who are thinking of changing career to look at it more like this. Meaning, you gradually take on more work related to the career you want to have down the road, and you gradually decrease the amount of work you do in the career you had before and you want to leave. So I'll take my own example. When I decided, here's the kind of my process. So at some point I realized I'm not meant to be an engineer as engineering is defined in Canada. Like I have a PhD in engineering. I've worked as an engineer for Procter & Gamble. I worked as an engineer for Xerox. And I realized I'm not meant to be, I don't think like Canadian engineers. I am far more interested in human resources. So, well, people. So kind of what happened is my first reaction is, all right, I'm going to go get an MBA. Like, the typical reaction of immigrants. My wife stopped me, so Diane, my first wife, stopped me and said, hang on a second. Before you get an MBA, figure out what you're going to do with it. So in other words, and this is a piece of advice I give everybody, before you do a degree or whatever, figure out, because that's always a step towards a goal. It's not a goal in itself. 3 years after you graduate, what will you be doing? And work backwards. Then you'll figure out whether you actually need it. Yes?
So So a quick note to that, for most immigrants, I think getting a Canadian education credential is just that, getting a
That's it.
Canadian.
Yeah.
So they're not thinking about what that will do for their career.
Exactly.
I just need a Canadian diploma, certificate, degree, or something.
Exactly. For many, so yes, for many immigrants, the degree, the diploma, is a goal in itself, and particularly if it's a Canadian one. Okay, so it's because education is fundamental, and if you have education back home, people will come and get you. They'll look for you because you have the. That's not the way it works here. Here, education is a step towards a goal, and many Canadians will not get a master's or a PhD. They'll go get a diploma from a college that is specifically in the area they're interested in. Very different mindset in that respect. So in my case, I mean, I realized, okay, I don't want to be, I'm not going to do engineering, but the question becomes, if I'm not going to do engineering, what am I going to do? Okay, so as I said, I realized I was interested in people, and essentially for me, it was an 18 months process. For the first 6 months, now I didn't start with that mindset, okay, it just evolved. But what ended up happening was over a period of 18 months, I went from engineering to this. So the first 6 months, I was thinking, well, if I'm not going to do engineering, what am I going to do? And I realized, okay, the one thing that I'm really interested in, and I think I'm better than average on this one, is working with people from different parts of the world, dealing with cultural differences. So after 6 months, I figured, okay, that's what I'm going to do. The next question became, all right, if I'm going to do this, how am I going to make money? Because I still need to pay the bills. So then the answer to that question became, well, there is no way I can get a salaried position in this field. It doesn't exist. And even if it did, I wouldn't have the credentials. Nobody would hire me for that. So the conclusion was, I need to start my own business. And then the question became, well, how do I do that? And I realized, well, I don't know how to create courses. So I figured I need to buy a license from an American company. Well, from a company, and I figured, well, I ended up identifying an American company that was selling training programs in this field, and I bought a license from them. But as I said, it was an 18-month process. Okay? For 18 months, I was still doing my work as an engineer. And I was very clear I wanted to be average. I didn't want to be below average because I don't want to be laid off or fired. And I don't want to be above average because I don't want anybody to tell me I should be part of a high potential program or whatever. I just want to be average. Nobody will notice me. And that was kind of my purpose. So that's what I recommend to people. Like, if you decide you want to do something else, rather than quit cold turkey, try to increase gradually the amount of time you do doing that something else. And obviously, since there's only 24 hours in one day, you'll probably will have to decrease gradually the amount of time you spend in doing whatever you were doing before. Make sense to everybody? Okay. So there's several pitfalls that many immigrants run into when they're trying to deal with, well, describing themselves as specialists. One big one is choosing between specializations. So we're going to come back to that point in a minute. Another big one is quantifying the difference they've made. That is a critical element. We'll come back to why. And the last one is calibrating. What I mean by calibrating is when you give numbers, well, what response will these numbers generate? So let's start with choosing between several specializations, because that happens a lot. Okay? Because people were moved from one area to another in their home countries, they end up very often describing their expertise as broad. If you really look at it in detail, you can really see that, well, they have 3, maybe 4 areas of expertise, which they can genuinely claim, meaning that they have definitely worked in those 3 or 4 areas. I'll take the example of my wife, Caroline. In China, she was a professor of English at in a Chinese university. She became the executive assistant of the CEO of Nortel China. She worked as an HR manager for Nortel China, for Compaq in China, and she was also, how do you call that, a contract administrator for Arco in China. So jobs that are fairly different, right? What was the common theme? What was the thing that, why was she doing that? Well, her strong suit was, sorry?
Office assistant admin.
Her strong suit was language. Her strong suit was she spoke English way better than the average Chinese. So that's why she was teaching. That's why she was working in all these foreign companies. They needed somebody who really understands English and Chinese. Okay? So that was her strong suit. So the challenge, and you will see people like that. I mean, I'm sure you've worked with people like that. They can genuinely claim several areas of expertise. And then the question becomes, well, which one am I going to put forward? So I find there's a few questions you can use in order to help people make that decision. The first one is, how recent is your experience in this area? This goes exactly to what we were discussing right before lunch. Yeah. If your experience is too old, it won't work. Yeah. And that is not just for immigrants. That is definitely for Canadians as well. The moment I realized how important it was, the shelf life of experience in Canada, I worked with one lady, so she was born and raised in Canada. She had a PhD in microbiology or something like that. She was working as a researcher in a research lab. Then she had a child, so she went on mat leave. And she had a second child, she had the third child, and she ended up being away from the workplace for 6 consecutive years. She went back, so she waited until the first child was essentially in grade 1 for her to go back to the workplace. When she went back to the workplace, she got a job in the same research lab she was working before she went on mat leave. But she was a technician. She was no longer a researcher. Her skills were considered as obsolete. All right? So how recent is your experience in this area is obviously one criterion, because if it's too old, forget it. Another obvious question is, how deep is your experience in that area? And if you have scratched the surface, that's very different from if you have done quite a bit of work in it. Another question is, how much demand is there for this specialization in Canada? Or in Alberta specifically. I've worked with people, for example, from China or Bangladesh, who had textile engineering as their specialization. Guess what? There is not a lot of textile engineering in Canada. It's all gone to China, Bangladesh, India, and countries like that. Okay? It's gone. It does not. There is no need for that specialization. So the question becomes, all right, well, what did you do with what else did you do, or like which part did you do? Maybe we can kind of adapt that. Okay? So a big part of the job of the counselor at that point, in my experience, is breaking down the experience of people in simple elements and reassembling them in a job. I mean, conceptually, that's kind of the way I look at it. You know, you break it down into small pieces, and you reassemble these pieces in a different job than the job they had. And there's one more question, because I'm sure you've all seen that situation. It's, do you like that kind of work? Or how much do you like it? Because if you're a counselor, I am sure you've met people who became engineers or accountants or something like this because their parents told them to do that. Or their uncle or wherever. Okay. And they have absolutely no interest in that job. But they did it because they were told to. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples. I remember one lady, like she was from China, and she became a pharmacist because her parents told her to become a pharmacist. But she really hated working with patients. So what does that mean? Well, retail pharmacy, forget it. Not going to work. So fortunately, she was able to get a job as a pharmacy researcher. That she could do. but she didn't like working with patients at all. One person, actually, I can't remember which workshop it was, but recently in a workshop like this one person gave an example. She said that she had one client, can't remember which country that client was from, but that client was told by her father, you either get married or become a medical doctor. So she decided to become a medical doctor. And she pulled it off. Okay, she did become a medical doctor. So you see the idea. Okay, like people will choose their careers based on criteria which may not be the way people in Canada would choose. Okay? And so as a result, how much do you like this kind of work is definitely an important question. Now for some people it's like, well, I need a job. So it's like maybe that will come later. Okay? But at least being conscious of that question is helpful. Questions or comments? Make sense? Yeah? So let's talk about quantifying accomplishments. So this is something, now I'm an engineer, so my belief is you can quantify anything. That's what we get paid for. Okay? So I run often into people in HR, social work, who tell me, well, no, you cannot quantify everything. So my challenge to them is, okay, well, give me an example. I'll show you how you can quantify it. So I'm exaggerating, but there is some truth to you can quantify if you really want to. Let's take the example of counselors. What measures could a counselor use to measure their effectiveness? Anyone?
The clients who became successful.
Yes. Yeah. What percentage of your clients were successful would be an obvious one.
Yes.
How many clients do you deal with in parallel? What kind of salaries do your clients get when they get a job? How long do they stay in those jobs? Meaning, what percentage of them 6 months after they are still in the job and get through probation or something like that? Okay. You all understand the concept. If you look a little bit, if you dig a little bit, you can very often find measures like ways of measuring your performance. As a counselor, for example, if I told you, well, I deal with 5 clients at a time. Well, at a time, meaning in parallel. Probably for the average counselor, 5 would sound like, well, that's not a lot. You can deal with more people than that. If I told you I deal with 500 clients at the same time, you probably would go like, that seems way too much. You cannot give any of them enough attention to make a difference. So there's going to be a range that you are likely to consider as about right. And what I find is this is what's going on in the mind of most Canadians. The way you're going to demonstrate to people that you do a good job is by giving them numbers related to your performance that they will compare to the scale of numbers they have in their mind. You don't convince them by telling them you're the best. That will work in the US, not in Canada. Yeah. So, fundamentally, Canadians, I find, have a scale in their mind. So, on the low end of the scale, you will end up, it's why bother. Yeah, you made a difference, but it's so small, it doesn't matter. It's not worth it. After that, when it gets a little better, okay, it becomes good. Then it becomes very good. Then it's amazing. And what is after amazing? Unbelievable. Unbelievable, yes. The other word for it is bullshit, if you'll excuse my language. It is too good to be true. So where do you want your numbers to fall? Well, obviously somewhere between very good and amazing. How will you know whether they fall in that range or not? This is where you have to talk to people in your field. Because a number may sound wonderful in one industry and sound terrible in another industry. So you want your numbers to fall somewhere between very good and amazing. And the trouble that some immigrants will run into, for example, and I've seen it, one key example, for example, was a guy from Haiti. He was a textile engineer in Haiti. And he had improved the the processes to make, like he was working in a plant that makes T-shirts in Haiti. And he had done an amazing job. And you converted what he saved for the company into dollars, and it was like $20,000 a year. Why? Does any of you know what is the salary of a assembly line worker in Haiti, like one of the people working in those T-shirt plants?
Probably a fraction of that.
Oh yeah, fraction is a good word. Okay, it's between $1 and $2 a day.
Yeah.
Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the world in terms of GDP per capita. Okay, so he did an amazing job, and then you turned it into dollars, and it ended up being peanuts. It doesn't even cover the cost of an engineer to do this work. So what's the solution there?
Convert to Canadian dollar. Convert the equivalency to Canadian dollar.
Percentages.
Or percentage.
Percentages. Percentages is far more effective in that case. Okay? Because this way, the percentage, it will be far more transferable than the actual dollars. Yeah? Another situation. So another challenge that many people will run into is kind of goes like this. Let me just rewind just a second. So, as I said, depending on the industry, the same number can sound wonderful or terrible. So let me give you a very concrete example. Let's say I tell you I was able to decrease the cost of making a part by 10%. Is that good? Where does that fall on the scale? The answer will depend on the industry. In the pharmaceutical industry, saving 10% of making a prescription drug will end up falling in the why bother category. In the automotive industry, saving 10% of the cost of making a part will end up in the unbelievable category. Why is that? Well, in the automotive industry, cars have been optimized for a long time. So what it means is people have done a lot of work to reduce the cost of making parts. And there's essentially no part in a car where you can save 10% of the cost of making that part. If you save 5%, that's already very good. 7% is amazing. 10% will be unbelievable. In the pharmaceutical industry, when Health Canada or the Food and Drug Administration approves a prescription drug, they also approve the process to make that drug. Why is that? Well, quite often there's impurities that may have quite an important role. We don't even know what they are and we don't know what role they play, but we know that if we always make it this way, we get something that works. So if you want to change the process to make a pharmaceutical drug, you will have to get approval from Health Canada or the FDA. And the process to get this approval is so long, so complex, and so expensive that nobody will even think of starting it unless you can save 50% of the cost of making that drug. So you see, 10% in the automotive industry will end up in the amazing category, bullshit category, and it will be in the why bother category in the industry, in the pharmaceutical industry. So what it means is your clients need to run their numbers by people in their field. Otherwise, they could end up generating a response which is very different from the one they want to generate. They may think they've done an amazing job, and it sounds to people like unbelievable, and now you have a problem. Make sense to everybody? Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, what's your first name? Onai. So I'm coming back to your point. Like, you know, you went to that networking event and you realized, like, well, there's nobody in my field. You still ended up finding somebody who was, a useful contact. The key part is information interview. Information interview is when you get this kind of data. What is good performance? How do you measure the performance, first of all? And what would be considered good? What would be very good? What would be amazing? What would be unbelievable? And that will be, as I said, specific to each industry. The other source of information where you can get numbers like these is trade magazines. You know what I mean by trade magazines? You know, magazines that are, well, for the specific to each industry again. Exactly, welding, like, so if I take not just trades as in professional trades, okay, trade as in they're not research, okay. So I'll take my own example as an engineer. I used to read magazines called something like Stainless Steel World, okay, Pump Engineer, Hydrocarbon Processing, the kind of magazines nobody reads except people who are in that field. And we come back to that point, specialization. But these magazines, first of all, they're full of advertising. Much of it is advertising. But in there, you will have articles. These articles are usually people in the field who have done a good job and decided to publish a paper about their work. Well, the numbers that are in those articles will give you an idea of what is good performance. First of all, which numbers do they use? And what does good performance look like? Yeah? Yeah, please. And where is it? Oh, yeah, that thing. So.
This might be more specific to me because I deal with a lot of accounting
Yeah.
immigrant professionals. I agree with your point on percentage.
Yeah.
I did just do a quick conversion though, and I don't know if my math is correct, but it looks like that person saved the equivalent of about 1.46 million if you do the conversion. So maybe what you could say is save 10% out of the labor cost, which is equivalent to this amount in Canadian dollar.
Yeah.
That number would then actually resonate.
Quite possible. For engineers, if you say 10% of the labor cost, that will be good enough. But I understand your point. From an accounting perspective, turning into dollars helps a lot. Okay? So the challenge becomes, how do you do that?
Exactly.
Okay? So, and that is a good point. For many people, many immigrants have a very hard time converting, like turning it into numbers. I mean, because many people will tell me, well, I didn't know the price of this and I didn't know how, like, it's like, well, estimate.
Exactly.
As long as you can explain how you came up with the number, you're good. That's all people are going to ask. How did you come up with 10%? Well, I calculated, we did this, like, and that's how people will very rarely ask you follow-up questions to dig into one of the numbers that you used in that calculation. Go ahead.
In the Canadian market, so people just want to get clarity on the basis about the number that are being presented.
Yeah.
That's the principle.
Yes, as long as it makes your numbers make sense and you explain how you got there, people will typically trust that's representative. Now, if your number sounds like they're wacky, meaning they're way out of the range that they consider as appropriate, then you've generated a negative response. Okay? Quite often they won't tell you like that you've generated a negative response. This is the challenge.